Okay. So today on Deep Thoughts, I'm going to talk about something that's very, very important to absolutely everyone, and something that I run into constantly, and I'm sure that a lot of you run into. And when I say that, we run into it personally, and we run into it externally with our friends and family. And it's going to be sort of the touchy subject and the complex subject of perception limiting reality. And before you think it's going to be some foo-foo conversation, we're going to go right at the jugular of how essentially that, especially if you're a truther, and I don't mean to say that as some elitist superior group of people, but just sort of a movement to shed off all the crap that we've ingested over the years, you start to solve the master questions of life and reality that we've all been striving to learn since we were born, since we started taking in information from other people, our parents, our friends, our schools, other institutions that we ingest, again, television, Hollywood, religion. And I think what's interesting is a lot of the paradigms that we are taught fall inside of a mechanism that's not necessarily healthy, even though there are healthy means of implementing this mechanism. What's that mechanism? Man learns very, very quickly when you're young that chaos can be very disturbing. Chaos can be where you can't control your life, where second to second in your life, if you can't control what's coming at you, then something might broadside you, so to speak. It's all metaphorical, check that out. And it can take away your life, your happiness. Again, it's all perception. Life is pretty cut and dry in terms of this mortal coil. Even if we have a soul and we go off and live another infinite life someplace else, we still want to preserve this particular instance that we have. So that's sort of a natural preservation thing. But what I'm concerned about is that we get addicted to rule systems from a very, very young age because it gives us stability even as a child. And I give you a really simple, stupid example, but when you're given your first toy, there's an elation with such a thing in that this is your toy. The implied rule set with you getting a toy of any kind is that this is yours. And then if anybody wants to play with that toy, they have to ask permission from you, and that gives you a sense of authority to delegate out your toys to others. Now, some of you have brothers and sisters, tons of them, and you rarely experienced that privilege, although you know, regardless of how chaotic your family was, there's still some objects that were yours. Maybe you hid them underneath your bed or what have you. Maybe they're just in your mind. One of the reasons why I always profess art as a mechanism to and give yourself power and perception and wealth inside yourself and value to yourself is that no one can take it away from you. Or it's really hard if they're trying to take it away from you. So if you learn how to draw, learn how to paint, learn how to write music, learn how to do anything in life that's a skill, whittle wood, fish, anything, it's stuck inside your head and no one can take it away from you. I always love the analogy that a college degree or any type of academic accomplishment is something that can't be taken away. You have it and you have it for the rest of your life. So we take that little kernel of addiction for controlling our lives by falling in love with control. And what that does is it sets off a chain reaction for the rest of your life that every little rule you can attach to your life that you approve of, and the only reason why you approve a rule in your life is because you visibly think it's going to give you a benefit. Now, some things are pretty cut and dry. Food and water, shelter, got to have those things. Basic education to think, you got to have those things. But there's a lot of things that are sold to us as benefits that we think are going to control things that aren't benefits in the end. And because when we're young, we take in so much information on faith from our parents, from those around us, and those tend to work out at the fundamental levels of mankind, right? When you're at the very base foundation of your life, you have nothing. And so when your parents give you a little bit, your grandparents give you a little bit, your friends give you a little bit, you do something on your own, you're building this infrastructure to build up your method of reality, your personal religion for living your life. And it works. You start to benefit immediately from the smallest rule system that you put in your life on most occasions, right? Now, we know that there's a cyclical pattern in all humanity where a lot of rules are additionally imposed on us that we don't like, and they're actually probably good for us, the parents trying to keep their kids away from bad friends or what have you, and then we fight to have them and that kind of thing, and we get ourselves in a bunch of trouble. But there's definitely this point, and I think safe to say around the teenage years, we've done a whole episode on rite of passage in the normal show, where you want to push out of the system that is controlling you. So why do this? Why do this episode? I always thought that when I was learning in school, if someone didn't give me the purpose of why I was learning something, I couldn't listen very well. So I always want to preface these episodes with why the hell would I do this episode? The main reason I want to talk about this is that, one, for those of you who are already listening, you're already doing this. You're already policing this kind of stuff. So I want to give us more ammunition and lucidity when it comes to why we choose certain rules in our lives, and maybe discern a little bit better those choices. But at the same time, as we share our lives with other people, we're going to run into barriers constantly where people have lived perhaps very sheltered lives, and they simply can't break free of the choices that they've made because in their mind those choices have been rock solid, even though they may not be benefiting from the rules that they've chosen for themselves, the paradigms of belief that give them constraints. But they're utterly terrified of change. So we have two sides to the issue, right? We've got the cause of the issue, and we have the symptom of the issue, the outcome of the issue. And a lot of times when we're truthers or we're trying to communicate with others, we try to fix it at this end and trying to wiggle back to this cause. And I'm going to tell you that the best conversation you could have is to discuss the cause, is to go right back to where I started this conversation to say, look, what are the odds that you got it all right without waking up first? And that can sound very arrogant to someone who is struggling with all this stuff. I was a kid who, I was born in Germany. Very shortly after that, I was moved to the Midwest, where my parents are from, where my bloodlines ended up. Lived a few years there, moved to another big city, lived a few years there, moved to Boston, Massachusetts, lived a couple places in that region, then moved back to the Midwest, finished up school, and then at 17, I went to California, and I bounced all up and down California, from Northern California to Southern California. Never quite going to San Diego, never quite going to Sacramento. In my journeys, I have met a lot of people at a lot of different levels in the world who've had tremendous lives, unbelievable lives, who've proven their lives to me by way of physical evidence, by way of intellectual evidence. And so when I deal with information that is, I would say almost unfortunately inside these conspiracies that we talk about, a lot of times I come from a position of having discussed it with individuals who either participated in some of these conspiracies or were right next to these conspiracies. Or at a minimum, they have the intellectual prowess to prove the conspiracies are conspiracies. To say, this is impossible, that is possible. Well, I'm no longer asking you. This is a black and white situation that we're dealing with here. And so when I have discussions with people who lived in the same household their entire life, maybe have the whole, a couple jobs their entire life, they haven't really traveled all 50 states. Or if they did, they didn't really partake of the actual culture itself. They just attended some event. But they want to check it off the list. I've been to this place. You'll find that those with the least amount of experience in the world seem to exude this hubris that they know the most about the universe. And that's just a defense mechanism that's natural in the body. So we don't need to get angry at these individuals or cut them out of our lives, but it's going to be a little tricky if you want to get close to them. And a lot of times you'll fascinate them. Your intelligence will fascinate them. The subjects you bring up for a little while will be interesting. You know, they don't mind hearing goofy conspiracies, but they just can't get into the ones that would actually mandate change in their life. Because the second you start talking about ones that they're passionate about, then all of a sudden there's this huge collision between the rule system that has made their life possible and this unknown chaos that's coming the other way. Is how they perceive us. They perceive us as being the ones that are going to tear apart their reality. And in a way, we are tearing apart their reality, but because they're so instinctually terrified of their reality being frayed, right? The decisions that they probably arbitrarily took in as information as kids is now going to be dismantled. And they fail to see the fact that we actually have the reassemble plan, which is usually in most cases much easier than the rule system that they created, ready to go. And so it's a process. Now, before I go into the external relationships with other people, I wanted to preface this is where I was going. We're going to talk about the internal struggles and then the external struggles. Because in order to explain it to someone else, I find that it's much easier when we can explain it to ourselves. How many times have you had a situation where you were terrified to do something new? Somehow you got tricked into doing it, or you did it, and you found out that it was easier, it was more amazing. Maybe it wasn't even easier, maybe it was harder, but it was more amazing. Maybe there's no effort involved at all, it was just fun. And then you try to get a friend to join you because you're like, man, this is the best thing in the world. And they take one look at what you're doing, and they're like, no way would I ever do that. And it's because they have a whole set of rules and fear structures that have been built up over time, right? Rules usually come with either a benign goal of, hey, I don't know how to deal with this. Oh, that rule's good. I'm just going to take that into my life. Or they've had a terrifying situation plague them forever, and a rule solved the problem. And we'll get into both those in a second here. I'll give you a real low-hanging fruit example of people who fear things. If you've ever hung out at a lake where there's a rope and a swing base, or just a rope even, right? You get up on the hill and you swing really far out over the lake and you let go, and you're 20, 30 feet in the air, and you plop down in the lake, and then you get back up on shore and you grab that rope and you go back and forth. First time you look at one of those things, it's terrifying. And again, if you're really overweight, you see all those videos on the internet of these poor kids that are 100 pounds overweight trying to do the rope trick, and they realize that physics takes over and they go out over the ledge and their body drags them to the ground. So as long as you're not one of those folks, there's no reason not to do the trick. It's really fun, right? As long as the water starts pretty soon, even if you fall off early, poof, you're right in the water. Just make sure it's deep, right? Trying to land on your head. But that's an example of when I was a kid. I remember looking at one of those things for the first time and going, whoa, that's freaky. But in me, the person that actually liked roller coasters that were really crazy and wild, it made me want to ride the roller coaster. Because in my mind, in my rule set, I knew that engineers had engineered this ride, and that hundreds, if not thousands of people are riding this thing every hour, on the hour, and there's no body pile at the end, right? It doesn't break. And so I can get on that thing, and I can assume that engineers, with their rule structure, have built something that has a rule that I can't die. And so I get on it and I ride it. It's great. With the rope at a lake, well, my buddy just tied this rope to a tree, right? Or his uncle did, or whatever. His dad did. And then we're all jumping off into the water. When you invite your friend into some of those paradigms, and there's adult versions, right? As you get older, there's a natural resistance and fear to what you're saying. And that's a very direct, on-point example of where your rule structure is being threatened, which causes fear, right? Which causes resistance. And then there's a more subtle one. You know, they say If you could see it with your own eyes, then it's real. And we know through computer-generated graphics that the average intelligence of mankind knowing what's real and what's fake is almost completely faded away. I don't know how an average child understands a Transformer movie. How do you tell a child that this is Maya, this is RenderMan, this is Weta, these companies that make these crazy movies that look utterly real, ILM, all these companies? How do you tell them that a Transformer doesn't really exist and we actually did a bunch of, 10 million, polygons per hand in this computer, and it renders a photorealistic hand, which then we can move around in a movie? How do you even tell a child that? How do they perceive that these things aren't real? Because it used to be back in the day when I used to watch cartoons, you learn how a cartoon works. Hey, people draw a frame, and then these animators and these tweeners, these in-betweeners, and then these painters come in, and there's backgrounds that are different than the foreground. You could just tell because the backgrounds were super detailed, and anything that moved was really just filled in pretty sloppily. But you could still understand it as a child. But right now, you can take an adult and show them 3D rendering packages, and they can barely conceive what they're looking at. It's just a bunch of lines on a computer, man. So we have this huge struggle right now between the perception of reality and fiction, of things that are completely synthesized in computers, and reality, which is why we believe so many things that are going on at NASA. We have a listener that is doing a great job harvesting a lot of images of satellites, of images of the Earth that have obviously been constructed in computers, just obviously. And it's interesting how when you show people things and you say, well, how do you know the Hubble telescope exists? Well, they say, well, because I've seen a picture of it. And what it is it's a 3D rendering of a satellite and a horrible rendering of Earth. And they say, well, that's the picture. And you're looking at this person going, that's not a real picture, man. You do realize that, right? They didn't send a picture satellite out there to take a picture of the real satellite, Of course, we've had some supposedly spacewalks on these things, that particular one, so we can say we think we've seen it, right? But the big one is health. Health is the first hurdle you might run into when you meet someone new, even just a friend, and you have to go to dinner or lunch, or God forbid you spend the night with them and you start using your non-fluoridated toothbrush, toothpaste, or that sort of thing. You have to get in the conversation because they'll give you their toothpaste and you're like, no, thanks. I freed my mind of fluoride and I am not going back to, for any fucking reason whatsoever. I'd have my fucking teeth fall out, then my pineal gland gets screwed up, or my teeth get infected with fluoride dust, or my bone density get lightened because of fluoride dust, or all the other toxic things that happen to you when you ingest fluorine / fluoride / dust for making aluminum, right? People say, oh, fluoride exists naturally in nature, and it's like, yeah, at millionths of the degrees that you take with a single toothbrushing, right? You could drink black tea your whole life and get a bunch of fluoride, but it's going to be a tiny, minuscule amount as opposed to one session brushing your teeth with fluoride, right? Well, what ends up happening with these more subtle rules, health regimen rules, is that when we're children, we're told what we can't have. You can't have sugar, you can't have soda, you can't have all these candies all the time because, a child would just become diabetic and nothing flat, and they'd be obese, and the food quality that they eat today is much different than the food quality when I was a kid. When I was a kid, everything was organic. There was no Monsanto making genetically modified organism food, right? GMO food. And so when you break out of adolescence, you get the privilege to eat all the bullshit you weren't supposed to eat. It's your right to fuck up your body and die young and full of pain. But the problem is the perception is that the rules are actually working, right? I can eat shit food and I stay okay. As long as your metabolism under 30 keeps you thin, hey man, you can fucking eat whatever you want. It's cool, right? But then you start getting into your later years, and all this toxicity starts building up in your body from all this crap that we eat. The aspartame, the fucking fluoride, the pure sugars. There's just an endless list of crap. If you take flu shots, if you were to vaccinate yourself against anything, you're getting mercury and aluminum and all this shit that sits in your brain. But in today's live fast, die young, badass theory of the fucking world, right? We have this thing that, well, I'm still alive, so this stuff can't be hurting me. Yep. Yep. Until the fucking doctor says you're about to die. Then what? Then what? Your body's entirely toxified. And then what? You're the tough guy who's going to just muscle it out of your body, right? Nope. You're going to start losing weight like a bitch. You'll be sucking on some tube in the hospital. And you're going to die 20, 30 years before you should in incredible pain, leaving behind all your friends and perhaps your family. If you have young kids, you're going to leave them fatherless, motherless, whatever. Now, sometimes we slip into this stuff and we don't know what's happening, right? I've lost a really good friend of mine when I was in my early 30s. He was in his mid-40s, and just out of thin air, he died of brain tumors. He had a grand mal seizure. 13 months later, he was in the ground. No history of cancer in his entire family. In fact, it was way before I woke up, and so I had nothing. I was just watching my friend die, And he wasn't given alternative truths to be able to say, well, I don't know if the guy ever drank aspartame. I don't know if he was a truck driver, so we think maybe some of the fumes from diesel fuel over the years got to him. We're not sure. We're not sure what killed him, but it definitely wasn't natural. It was a man-made thing that got him. So he had no choice. He had no alternative methods. We didn't know about the Gershom technique, which has existed since 1905. Why doesn't every cancer patient know about the Gershom technique? Why isn't it when you walk into a hospital, they don't tell you about vitamin C, the vitamin C catalyst, B17? Again, why don't they tell you to get off pure sugars and meats like right away? Some of them do today, but they don't give you these free alternatives. They give you this chemotherapy. They do super invasive surgeries in your body and screw up everything. But today, there's no excuse. Today, there's absolutely no excuse to look in the face of health and reject it. And all of this comes down to that perception rule system. And sort of this arrogance that you can't tell me what to do. If you're talking to someone over 40 who's still fucking saying, you can't tell me what to do, you got a big challenge on your hands. You have a huge challenge on your hands, because that is a very irrational, immature thought process to continue pursuing after 40. People will ask me every once in a while, and I don't want to sound, like I'm tooting my own horn, but people ask me, why are you so smart? And I say, because at 25 years old, I stopped listening to my own bullshit. At 25 years old, I let the elders of my world, who were where I wanted to be in life, educate me on that specific category of life that I admired in them. Now, you might have like a genius something or other, but he's a drinker. So I don't take the drinking regimen from him. I take his genius, right? Or some people I've just copied because they were great people. They were tender souls, and they didn't know anything special. But just their demeanor and how they talked. One of my dad's best friends, my dad and I always talk about him. He is just one of the smoothest cats in the world, and he and I both admired this guy, and still alive to this day. And I just think he was always a great salesman because he was just smooth, and he was tender, and he was genuine, and he is to this day. And I took that from him, or I try to every single day of my life, right? So I freed myself from my childhood at around 25. 25 was a big deal for me, and I've heard other people say it too, where you've lived a quarter century. And I've always lived my life thinking I need to live it now, right? This year has to have something better than last year in terms of an accomplishment. It doesn't have to be money at all. It can just be my own mental application for myself to the world. It could be a career thing. When I had a kid, it was obviously becoming a better father every single day of my life. But I want to get us to the point where we start really analyzing how we limit our lives. What choices have you made that actually say, look, I was fearing this chaos, and then I made this choice, and that chaos went away, and it became manageable. My fear of the unknown, which is largely the fuel that makes a rule acceptable in your mind, okay, maybe make this choice. And then the more the choice actually starts fixing this chaos, which is driven by an irrational fear in the first place, right? Now, sometimes things are pain and suffering, and that's a little bit different, right? If people drink too much when they're young, they start puking every night and they start having hangovers the next day, and they start to correlate eventually the drinking too much equals these horrible outcomes, and so I'm going to drink less or stop drinking completely, and I won't have this repeating, sequence in my life that's atrocious, right? I think it's funny when I see adults get hammered constantly, I think, wow, you're still living in your youth, right? Somehow there's that, what I call counting beers. If anyone walks up to you and starts, especially over 40, it's fucking hilarious. How many beers have you had? How many is that? How many drinks do you have? Or they're like, man, I've had 10 of these things. And they're just trying to win you over by how much fucking alcohol they can ingest. You just pity their souls in that one realm of their life to say, look, you got to fucking move on with life, man. Like I drank a lot in high school. Didn't drink at all really that much in the high school, man. I pounded booze like crazy. And I found this pattern that I hated because my body doesn't really like any sort of alcohol on major levels, right? And then when I grew up and came to Los Angeles and started hanging out with very accomplished people here in Hollywood and the LA area in general, I noticed that the adults just have a drink, loosen up a little bit, and that's it. And they don't all stay out till 2 a.m. to prove to someone they stayed out late. They didn't drink too much, and they were professionals, right? They went to bed at night at a decent hour, and they got up the next day and muscled through it. And I've met the exact opposite too, which is sort of the opposite constraint system, which is no drugs, no alcohol, which is fine. But they'll be in bed at 9 o'clock. They'll be up before anyone is up to experience life with them. And they kind of wonder why they're isolated, right? Because they're in bed before anything happens in the world. And they're up before anything starts. And so they have all this time to themselves. And they start getting cabin fever within their own life, right? Because by the time they start joining society, they're at work. And then they'll work from 8 to 5 or whatever it is. And then they go home, they get a tiny slice of life, especially if they have a family, got to feed their kids, put them to bed, and they may have a half an hour before they have to go to bed. And they live these horribly isolated lives that they themselves can't understand why they don't enjoy life. And why they talk to their friends, and their friends are having actual experiences in life because they went to a particular gathering late at night. I actually dated a person who was always in bed by around 9:30. And we live in Los Angeles, and I'm always next to the entertainment business of either music or television, or sorry, not television that much, but film. And we have events we can go to all the time, VIP. And it was like I couldn't go anywhere because by the time these events started, right, a concert starts around 9 o'clock when you have the headliner, right? I couldn't possibly take her there. If I did, she'd be utterly exhausted during the concert, and we couldn't see anything, right? So some rule systems get a little wonky in the opposite direction of conservatism, We're back on the subject of dealing with these constraints and dealing with these choices, because we do it every single day, and we've done a lot in our past. And the one thing you're absolutely never taught, and I don't know if it's a conspiracy, but it has to do with you're not taught to renegotiate your mind at any point in time. And that should literally be your upbringing when you're a kid. Kid, you're going to go from 0 to 15, and at 15, I want you to rethink your entire life. Rethink every decision, every rule you've ever chose to put on yourself and constrain yourself by. And then at 25, I want you to do it again. And for every 5 to 10 years of your life, minimum 10, I want you to purge stuff that you chose for yourself and consciously do it. And organize your life so that you can see the compartments, the categories of the choices that you've made. And the reason why I think that this would never be encouraged, I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's a mass void in consciousness, is that we grow so comfortable with the choices that we make, and we're so I think we're even financially constrained and resource constrained to a point where we don't perceive that we have time to do it. And there's no mechanism, right? No one teaches you anything. If you want to go off to become an attorney, you go to law school, and the law, is very specific. You only get your basic law foundational understanding of how law operates, but then you go specialize: family law, corporate law, environmental law. You go off and get a wing of something, and you're walking into an institution that slowly built up over time that said, as we make this super duper complex, because law is complex, that they have methods of teaching you this stuff. And that's sort of how we would have to do this particular exercise to say, okay, fine, dude, I buy into your concept of having to renegotiate things, but how the hell do I do it? Where do I start, right? So let's go through some categories where we can actually begin to evaluate what we think we believe is our rule system. Now, we talk about spirituality a lot, and I think that that's a pretty heavy concept. You're either going to be prone to go at it from a very existential side first, or you're going to come at it from a very practical standpoint first. On one side, you have who you are as a being. Are you a mortal coil? Is this it? Flesh and blood, a little bit of electricity in here. Is this it? When you die, it's final. There's no God. There's no scientific God. There's no spiritual God. You are simply a bunch of matter that came together, and all this makes sense to you, right? So there's that side of the equation. Then there's things that I think could be easily pushed in from your health side. What do you eat? What do you use to keep your body clean and healthy? And make decisions as to whether or not you've been had by pharmaceutical companies, by food organizations, and by the hospitals that are owned by the exact same banker families that own all the food supplies and regimens that you use from cradle to grave. Now, we've said many times on the show that just reviewing the memoirs of the Rockefellers and the corporate mission statements of the Rockefellers, they had lamented at the turn of the 18th to 19th century, or I should say the 19th to the 20th century, that they were going to try to own the human condition from cradle to grave. Every single thing you ingest throughout your life is going to be made by one of their corporations. And then the hospitals that you're born in, they also own. The hospitals you're going to die in, they also own. The hospices that you sit in, they also own. And to this day, they've accomplished that goal wholeheartedly, right? They feed us shit our whole life. We get sick, and then we die in their hospitals. And the weird thing is, the irony is this. The people that grab a hold of all the makeshift propaganda rules of their life, eat this crappy food, use these things to make yourself healthy at home, they're actually not healthy, and they're not happy. And so when you tell them you're going to die early because you're ingesting all that crap that's actually making you unhappy, they won't admit it, but the truth of the matter is they're ready to die. They want to die early. Deep down inside, they'll never say it, but a part of them goes, oh, thank God, this rat race is over. I'm so tired of fighting my weight. I'm so tired of fighting my health. Let's just get this over with, right? Maybe if I die early, I won't go crazy before I die, right? Because of all the toxins in the brain, right? And there's some truth to all of that, right? If you do mess up your life, you'll get to a point where punching your ticket might seem like the easy way out. And hell, maybe it is the easy way out. It's definitely not the way to live the most of your life, right? And contribute to society and really become who you are. You've just become sort of a part, almost like a piece of fuel in the money system and the control mechanism of the Rockefellers that said they wanted to own you from cradle to grave. They get to live their lives exactly how they want to live their lives, plus or minus some reality. But overall, they got to rule their destinies because they took it seriously and they don't pollute themselves. One of the funniest things I run into is that there's all this talk about how vegetarianism is the most healthy way to eat. And Al Gore said he's a vegetarian now, which is funny. The Clintons, or at least Bill Clinton, said he's a vegetarian. All these really, these high-end bought-off politicians have made it a point to tell the world they're vegetarians. Now, here on our show, we think that vegetarianism is a scam on the human condition. It makes you unhealthy over a prolonged period of time. Steve Jobs was a vegetarian from 17 to 56 when he died, and he died of the inability to digest proteins. But no one picked up on the fact that proteins aren't in vegetables and the vegetarian diet on any level. Like, you have to eat massive amounts of fat to get the tiny amount of proteins, and the protein index in your genes mandates red meat consumption. All right? And I guess you're going to get a bunch of blowhards telling you that's not true, but there's 8 classifications of the proteins that we eat, and 5 out of 8 are derived from red meat, not white meat, not chicken, not pork, but straight up red meat, which is why nature eats meat, and they eat it fresh. They don't cook it, and if the animal's been dead for a little while, they know genetically don't eat it because it's ionized and has no value to them. So when they kill an animal, they are eating it while it's screaming, right? And they go straight for the organs that have the most protein, the liver, the spleens, all the tender insides, and then they go for the muscles last. You have to eat what you're made out of, people. But here's the funny thing. People also don't pick up on the fact that the master chefs of the world, right, your Gordon Ramsays, are huge meat eaters. And they're meat eaters for 2 reasons. One, they learned it in culinary school, at the finest culinary schools on planet Earth. 2, they love the energy that you get from doing it, from eating it, right? But they also know that their customers, who are the elite of the world, the ruling class, banker families, royalty families, all eat red meat. And so the finest chefs in the world are taught how to prepare red meat because the richest, most intelligent, information-coveting people eat it. But the masses down here at the bottom are taught to eat something that will make them unhealthy. Because as soon as you're unhealthy, you have to go into the hospital more often, right? And you'll get exceptions to the rule where the guy's been a vegetarian for a couple years and he's just built, he's all ripped up because he's got his muscle meat on his body. But you visit that guy 20 years later, his skin's going to look thin, wrinkled, promotes aging. You're not replacing your cells with what your cells were originally made out of. So as soon as the cell divides, it's ripping off all this stuff from different parts of your body. And the same thing goes for digesting toxins. When you start digesting toxins, your body needs what it needs to procreate, and it will find it wherever it can find it. So it starts stealing it from all the different areas of your body, leaving your body weakened. These are black and white facts about the health regimen of your body. But we're convinced by propaganda to be righteous and choose away from ourselves what keeps us healthy. There's this big debate about fluoride. And when you pop out of the coma and you stop just fighting it for the sake of fighting it, you get to this real interesting point in your life where you realize that fluoride's very new in the regimen of man. And yes, we know about the aristocrats who lost all their teeth. We hear about, we can go to this museum and look at was George Washington's fake teeth made of wood. But that was directly proportional to the introduction of sugar into the diet of man, where they found sugar beets, they found sugar cane, they found a bunch of places to harvest sugar. And of course, it tasted incredible. It creates an immediate electrical addiction in your mind. And so they're ingesting all this pure stuff on their teeth. They're not brushing. They don't even know what flossing is. At most, the ancients used picks, like toothpicks sort of things. We do have a lot of history of brushes being constructed out of a lot of different things, from frayed wood to actually, hair off an animal. So if you keep going back in history, though, and you get back to where sugar was not a diet, you start finding people with all their teeth. And one of the areas you can search really quickly are mummies from the ancient times of, say, Greece and Egypt. There have been massive discoveries in Egypt of these mass graves where they found, I believe it's around 30,000 plus mummified caskets of Greek people that actually would migrate from Rome or Greece, and they would go down and be buried in the style of the Egyptians, because they realized the Egyptians had the drop on spirituality, on where you go and that sort of thing. At the time it was all, allegorical to their gods. But these mummies are found with all their teeth. There's this big myth about how the pyramids were constructed, and I would say if you were to read anything in mass media about how the pyramids are constructed out of slaves, you've been completely duped, right? But the mummies of the people who built the pyramids, their caskets are noted as being construction. I don't know about maybe the pyramids, but building the temples and the various facilities around there. You have 70-year-old bodies with all their teeth. Pharaohs that are 90+ years old with all their teeth. So there's a regimen without fluoride that worked. I don't know if they used the brushes, sort of thing. We have found, again, toothbrush-like objects that we think were toothbrushes. They go back as far as recorded history. So I'm a little off on the beaten track, giving you some very specific examples. But this is to show you that you can get easily frustrated with a lot of these choices because, again, once you start shoveling away all the propaganda and you start making decisions for yourselves, right? Like I was saying, every 5 to 10 years, you need to renegotiate what you think about reality. You start to realize that you've been had. And that's the rub. If you convince anyone else they've been had, they get defensive about the decisions that they've made in their life. And you won't be right all the time. And you need to be definitely an adult to say, and capitulate and say, oh yeah, you're right. I may have bit off too much in this particular conspiracy. But as we say on the show as well, people approach the world from their perspective. And I find that the people that have been more sheltered in their life have traveled less in terms of really ingesting the cultures where they go. Again, there's people that travel all over the United States and go to events. That's not living. That's just being a vacationer, right? You're not really understanding how the people in Alabama wake up in the morning and do their regiment. What's important to them? What's their music? What's their culture? Why do they like the Confederate flag? You'll find that the people, these type of folks, feel like they're authorities. And I think they feel like they're authorities for one actually pretty legitimate reason, rationally speaking, which is that they see themselves more secure than those who have taken risks. When I moved from the Midwest to California, a very interesting phenomenon occurred, and I had a sociology teacher that told me I should never move more than 200 miles from my hometown. And I couldn't understand that at all when I was a kid, and finally I got it on several different levels. But one of the pieces of wisdom is that you move away from your family. And I moved 1,800 miles away, right, from Kansas to California, this way. And when you want to just go see your relatives, it's a pain in the butt. You got to buy a plane ticket. You got to take time off from work, and you really want to see them. So you're going to take like 10 days off, 2 weekends and 5 working days, that sort of thing. It was my typical trip back, either Christmas or 4th of July. And your relatives start dying. If nothing else, they start separating from you where they don't really connect with you anymore. You grow apart, as they say, especially when you're 17, like I was. You move, and I became a completely different human. My mind finally matured up to what I was going to be as an adult, and then because of my regimen, I just that definition even changes every 5 years or so. But the second thing was that opportunities in life are largely based on who you know. And when you're constantly relocating and transplanting, you can never meet anyone that lasts in your life cycle for any length of time. And so I would move away from the Midwest. I went to Southern California for about 4 years, met a bunch of people, networked, got great jobs, did a bunch of amazing stuff, according to me. Moved to the Bay Area because the recession killed Los Angeles. So here I go off to the Bay Area. Again, don't know anyone again. I'm at ground zero. Finally started meeting people. Lived there about 12 years. Again, took me a while to get my dream jobs. And I did them. And then we got laid off again because of 9/11 and the second tier of the internet bust, which was ridiculous, right? The internet was just coming online, and people in the internet business couldn't get jobs. It's like, what? It's the most in-demand thing in history for the last couple hundred years, and we can't get any work in it, because the Wall Street people were controlling who was going to get the venture capital. And every company getting on the internet was in a venture capital status. So it was very easy for them to reach into this pool of resources pool of opportunities that needed resources and just shut it off. And that's what they did. And they were trying to start a war, so they wanted a lot of kids without opportunities to have to go to the Army just to get, any future at all, a GI Bill to go to school or something like that, because their parents were busted, which is the standard boom and bust pattern that follows war. It's always a bust right before war. So I finally came back down to Southern California, again at ground zero. I blew through tons of cash just trying to find what I wanted to do, and I eventually couldn't find the employment that I wanted at another company, so I started my own company, and we made several $1 million. It was really cool. So that journey proved to me that when I saw the people that were very risk-free in their lives and had money in the bank, they got a mortgage with some equity in it, they've had jobs for a really long time, if not for their whole lives, for very long stretches of their lives. If they started their own business, they always had plenty of people to network with from school, from college, from their local neighborhoods, because everybody goes off and becomes somebody, right? Looking back at my hometown, which doesn't have a lot of money going through it, but the people who are most successful, the people who didn't move away. Successful as in terms of, your standard kind of a apple pie America success stories, right? Not a lot of risk, but definitely enough gains that they kind of are able to live that normal archetype of life that, get married, buy a house, have a couple kids, wait for your grandkids, get fat and die, right? So what that taught me was that moving around is actually really, really tough. But now here's the upshot of the whole thing. In my particular journey, I'm sure mine's very, very unique, moving around and bringing my prowess, bringing my skill sets. I would typically gravitate to a point where I would always work for the CEO in some capacity at whatever company I ended up joining, because they could rely on me, they could communicate with me, give me a pretty complex task, and I could go off and get it done. And I think we just enjoyed each other's company, I think, too, because what I've always realized is that CEOs on a lot of levels are very isolated people. And being isolated, they're isolated in their struggle, where it's that old saying, they're lonely at the top, right? And so I noticed that I could communicate with these individuals if I approached them in a certain way. And the way was sort of a conversation which existed in the realm of the empathy of their condition, right? I've said it on the show a couple times that I started emailing Steve Jobs when he, back in the 90s when he worked at Pixar before he came back to Apple. And I honestly, I didn't really connect Steve Jobs with Apple until the 90s. It was interesting. I used his computers. Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, I give them equal credit for their brilliance. In fact, I mourn the fact I've never really met Steve Wozniak, because I think he and I could have an amazing conversation. But I started emailing Steve just some sort of esoteric philosophical things. And for the first couple emails, and I'd send it about once every 6 months. And I knew this guy was going to probably get it, but he's going to start a friendship with me through email. Wasn't going to happen like that. But when he got to Apple, I was then able to hit him right where it counts, because he was trying to resurrect the company that Gil Amelio and everyone before him had really screwed the pooch on this place, and he knew exactly what needed to happen. Wired magazine came out with a whole issue of 100 things that Apple needs to do, and he needed as much help and perception as he possibly could. And I was a huge Apple guy before. Now I think they're almost disgusting, but I was tracking a lot of the conversations and the marketing bullshit between Intel and Apple, which now they're friends, right? But I was able to hit him with a few emails and a few pieces of marketing materials that I had had online since the internet started. Since I got online probably 1996, my first website, and I had always put this Why I Choose Apple webpage, and I kept writing about it. It became very famous in the Apple community, which at the time was much smaller. And I was able to hit him with a couple of these things, and he ended up using some of the materials. You guys probably will not believe me as I say this to you, but I coined a phrase in my Why Apple article several years before it was ever used in public, called the megahertz myth. And I essentially wrote a paragraph that educated people. It doesn't matter how many cycles a computer processor actually goes through. It's the horsepower of every cycle, right? So a 32-bit chip does 32 rounds of information on one cycle, whereas a 64-bit chip will double that capacity roughly, right? And so Intel kept coming out with this better megahertz, but the Motorola chips and the PowerPC chips coming out of IBM had more power, more horsepower. So I'm in these other conversations with Steve, and he would give me like one-word replies after a while. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for caring, that kind of stuff. Just their standard boilerplate junk. And then I finally hit him with this one. I said, look, this is the thing you need to say. I said, it was right after January Apple conference, and we were headed into the June Apple conference. I believe that's the way that went. But I sent him this, and my friends knew about the article, and I told him exactly what I was doing before I did it. And he actually walked on stage, because I copied the head of marketing and I copied him. This is, again, Apple's really small, right? It was very easy to walk up to Steve at a Whole Foods in Cupertino and say hello, right? While he was in his barefoot and jeans, right? He walked on stage and used it. He used Megahertz Myth on stage and just set the record straight, and it was over. The fucking planet stopped thinking about megahertz as being the way to rate a chip, unless they also attached the bit rate of the chip, right? So I give you that example because we are so convinced of what we can't do and what we can't do because of these perception bubbles that we put on ourselves, right? And we have to understand how other people think. Otherwise, you're going to be very isolated in the choices that you make in life. I harp about empathy. And again, that's you perceiving how someone else feels, not just feeling sorry for them, right? How are they experiencing this reality? So the tough thing is that we don't have an eHarmony in the world for people who are truthers. We just don't, right? We don't have clubs that we can go hang out with people that are truthers very easily. So most of us are relegated to online conversations or a couple of the friends that we know that wake up. But no matter how much a person starts to wake up, you're always at a different level, right? If you're even in a year ahead of someone else, unless they're really aggressive, they won't catch up to you for a while. And sometimes they're really slow. Sometimes they rely 100% on you to wake up. And so you're having to constantly feed them as quickly as possible to try and bridge the gap so you guys can go, okay, we're on the same level. You go research this, I'll go research that, and we'll come together, compare notes, and we'll all get on the same level. So to loop back on the two areas, just to put a button on both of these, yourself and then the external relationship you have with others, be it family or friends or loved ones that you meet in the world. Understand that chaos isn't always evil, right? There's chaos that's used to herd reality, right? We always talk about the chaos, or was it order out of chaos theories that the ruling class used to herd reality, right? So they create a bunch of chaos that freaks everyone out. They know everyone's a coward, and so as soon as they provide a few exits to the theater that are the order they want you to filter into, you don't have to go through the door. You could stay in the chaotic sense and they won't be able to control you. Like, please go through that door. We have all the control mechanisms ready for you as soon as you go through that door. And if you just stay in the chaos and kind of relax a little bit, you'll notice the chaos turns to order. It's interesting. Oh, we were just afraid. We were just afraid of something we didn't understand. And a lot of times they'll create fear bubbles, which are related to someone else got hurt doing this. So, if they had done that, they wouldn't have experienced this. And so they herd you that way. So they'll say, well, look at the bum with no teeth. So he didn't use fluoride. Well, no, he didn't try to brush his teeth. He probably ate the cheapest stuff he could get because he only had a couple bucks, which is all the processed food, processed sugars, didn't floss, and of course he lost his teeth. I know people that have lost all their teeth. I know several people lost all their teeth. So it does happen in the world. We're unfortunately born with different layers of enamel on our teeth. And so some people have safe teeth. Some people have very vulnerable teeth. But they'll use that sort of mechanism to herd you into certain situations. And it goes on a political level, religious level, everything you can possibly conceive of. Because the second that someone's able to herd you, there's power. And they could be, good people. And when they feel that sense of control of others, it's elating. I had a good friend of mine, and I've mentioned her once on my other essays, that she worked for me, and brilliant employee, brilliant. She worked for me, and I won't identify her in any capacity as to protect her, but she was fantastic at what she did. And I promoted her to being a manager. And I've never seen a faster transformation in a human being. And it was all well-intended. She wanted to actually impress me with the fact that she appreciated the opportunity of being promoted. But what she didn't do was look to her peers, because I had 3 other managers working for me, managing anywhere from like 10 to 30 people apiece. And she had kind of a small group, maybe like 10 or so. And she immediately became sort of what you might call like the soup Nazi, right? She just clamps down on everybody and really micromanaged everyone. And they eventually came to me and said, we just cannot take this anymore. We had a culture that was established by you and all the other managers that was very dynamic and nebulous, and we always got our work done. We always showed up on time, but we didn't, these new constraints on us are not part of the culture that you've built. And I was like, gosh, you're right, So I met with this person several times and tried to kind of talk her out of it, and eventually it just was alien to her. She didn't know how to manage without micromanaging, because she was concerned that things were going to fall through the cracks, et cetera, et cetera. So I had to move her, / kind of like not really demote. Her pay didn't change or anything, but I had to move her out of the capacity of being this manager. I moved her a really upper level producer position. Genius person, absolutely, and sweet, and just the perfect kind of human being you want in your life. She eventually was laid off with a bunch of us at Electronic Arts when they went tits up on a .com project, and she went off to join the visual effects world, and ended up being a legend in the visual effects realm for a very kind of singleton sort of job, where she didn't have any reports, but what she did was amazingly brilliant, and so they rewarded her like crazy. And she's now done several of the animated films that you know of in the world. I won't identify the films because it will identify her, but I love her to death to this day. But that's an example of feeling the power and going overboard. And we don't just do this to other people. We do it to ourselves. Again, a lot of times, because thinking is such a bad word in society today, right? Because once you think, right, I have a whole episode on thinking in the essay sections of mkultraradio.com. Just go to the website and search on thinking. It's one of the most listened to essays that I've ever done. That's, my solo essays. But it has to do with the fact that memorizing and repeating is not thinking, right? You take someone from Jeopardy and you put them into a Mensa society and you give them an IQ test of any genre whatsoever, and they can't understand why I'm not asking them the capital of Estonia. I'm giving them a number set and saying, guess the next number in the set. Oh my God, I got to think, it hurts, right? Well, that's what thinking really is. And it's sort of like this dirty word in that slapsticky version of reality where you don't want to have to put any effort into who you are as a human being. And we've got to crush that. We've got to make that a blasphemous sin, that you don't just sit there and take in all the rule structures from society and just live your life, because you won't get what you're really looking for. You might get a system of security. I have family members of mine that were baby boomers that went right through the apparatus of all indoctrination. They have big, giant savings accounts. They own their houses. They own their cars. They travel the world, that sort of thing. Sounds great, right? In the end, they're not who they wanted to be by any stretch of the imagination. They need that money to travel to forget who they really are. And they have psychoses about their intelligence. I have a family member of mine where I accidentally, in an effort to support this person, they wanted to write a book. And so they said, we got this book we want to write, and it's a husband-wife team. in the family. And I said, that's great. That's awesome. I'm totally into that. I want to read it. Just give me drafts. I'll do whatever you want me to do. Just give you feedback, edit it, whatever you want. And then we got into the discussion of when to write it and when to produce it into the world. And there was a very timely book. It was like, man, this thing should exist today because there's going to be a real need for it in society right now. And I accidentally said, in discussing the marketing strategy of the book, not the individuals contributing or their intellectual abilities, I said, well, it seems kind of stupid that we wouldn't do it now and do it this way. Said the word stupid. And I always think that adults that let words offend them are actually children traveling in adult vehicles. Adults should not be offended. It should be impossible to be offended as an adult, right? At most, if someone says something to you that would kind of get towards that offended realm, you need to have pity on that person. If I'm a black person and you're calling me the N-word and you're a white person, it's got to be at the level where you're like, man, I really feel sorry. Inside, you just think, look, it's really a shame that this person is remaining racist in a world where we've kind of proven that there's no point to it at all, right? So I always think that's the case. But anyway, this family member is with me in a car, and I'm driving about 30 miles down this little country road, paved road in town. And this person tries to get out of the car while it's moving. Frantically goes berserk and tries to grab the handle, is so angry because the one psychosis that they had in life was that they know they really didn't become an intellectual, which is what they really wanted to be. All they did the Jeopardy game to life. Memorize, repeat, follow rules, grab the tail in front of you. As long as the masses are doing the same thing you're doing, man, you did such a good job with life. But guess what? Your soul is connected to the universe, and it smells bullshit immediately and forever. So when you try to bullshit yourself about who you are, and you're full of shit, you really know deep down inside you fucked up your life and you are full of shit, your soul will let you know every single day. And the first person that says, you're the emperor and you don't have any clothes on, kaboom, you are devil incarnate, right? And so you have to be careful. Now, what my choice in life is to get rid of these people out of my life. I don't need those people in my life. I am not going to retard my growth in life because someone else doesn't want to fucking believe the truth or even try, right? And trying is this. Well, you should be able to debate as a human being the potential realities of any subject you can bring up, from the existence of Jesus Christ, either not existing or existing, to brushing with fluoride, to eating good foods, to not worshiping material objects in life, to valuing love over some sort of security blanket that a person can bring to you, right? Oh, this person changes my oils and takes out the trash. Fuck, we're just going to spend our life with that guy, right? It has to have substance. And so part of the subplot of this particular episode is to get you into a full understanding of, hey, we picked rules when we were children. And a lot of times we think we have an opinion about bullshit we've never had an opinion about. I have to have arguments about aspartame with people. I have to have arguments. I mean, I don't really have to, and I'm kind of exaggerating here, but I have to debate in a kill the messenger sort of realm about fluoride, about genetically modified foods, things that are fucking black and white, destroying the body, vaccinations for children, which make absolutely no goddamn sense at all. You have to be devoid of any pharmaceutical knowledge, any medical knowledge of even the most rudimentary level to think that this shit, under any pretense, is good for your kids. Right? You're not protecting your kids. You're abusing your children. You're rolling the fucking dice on their brains, and you have no fucking right to do that. And I don't give a shit if you're their parent or not. You do not have the right to scramble the brains of your child before they have the right to do it for themselves. You know, there's religious institutions which baptize their kids at birth because that's their belief system. Fine. It doesn't hurt the child. It is your belief system being imposed on your child that makes you feel good about yourself and then supposedly saves your child from going to hell, as if God is some fucking asshole, right? He's not. If he exists, he's not. I'm sure he's not. Later on in life, some of us choose to be baptized, when we get back into religion or something like that, and that's our choice. But vaccinations are rolling the dice on your child before they have a chance to speak, before they have a chance to walk very well, right? At 18 months before your kid really masters language, you're injecting their minds with propaganda in the form of mercury and aluminum. And yeah, they have seizures in the middle of the night. I dated a woman that gave her kid vaccinations. Her daughter went into the ER that night having convulsions. Now has attention problems. Case in point, man. And we're vaccinating against things that are curable through antibiotics. So your fucking kid gets chickenpox. Who dies of chickenpox? So your kid gets whooping cough, which hasn't been recorded in American history. All those people that say they get it are usually immigrants, or it's a lie, right? Because we've pressed a few pediatricians who want to push that propaganda. You got to get this because it's breaking out all over. Some kids died yesterday. And we're like, who? Who died? Tell me. Tell me exactly their names. Where do they live? Who died? Oh, well, I don't really know that. Oh, so you're peddling propaganda to inject me full of toxins so you can make a buck off of a free shot. It's free to you, but you get a $100 kickback if you can inject my kid with 6 of these things. Yeah. Pediatricians don't, on average, vaccinate their own children because they know it's bullshit. So again, you're going to have these debates that are black and white. At some point, depending on how regimented you are, I would say give everybody a chance and then cut them loose. Because you cannot live in this constant situation where your life is constantly spinning its wheels and not living your life. Because there's plenty of people with their heads out of their asses. If nothing else, they have their head out of their ass in a way that they will literally realize that they don't know what they're all authoritative about, right? But your person who hasn't traveled the world, hasn't really lived any lives, has had, they just haven't engaged reality. For them to have these strong opinions, guess what, dude? It's just going to get worse. It's going to get fucking worse with those individuals. So cut them off. Go find different friends. Go find different lovers. If your family members are really intense on this kind of stuff, well, hey, you usually visit your family, right? I know it sounds hard, but cut down on your visits because all it's going to happen is each visit's going to be more and more disingenuous, more and more boring. I've had to do it in my own life. I've got sort of distant relatives that live in total propaganda bubbles, have not had original thought in their life, and I just shut them off. One of them I even told, look, I don't want any more of your fucking emails, and you live in complete bullshit. I just don't want any part of this, right? And thankfully, they left. And guess what? I haven't missed them in one day of my life. Not one day of my life, because I get to live in truth, right? And there's plenty of people who live in truth just like you and I that we can find and spread our knowledge to. And again, most of us don't really claim to have all the exact answers except for in some black and white health issues, right? But we leave the door open and we debate like adults. And we don't get angry when someone disagrees with us. We simply say, why do you believe what you believe? And as long as you're not getting the ridiculous, childish defense mechanism, well, I just can't believe, therefore it can't be fucking true, right? As long as you get that kind of response, you've got a foundation to work with. I make friends with a lot of the listeners on the show, and from time to time I'll Skype or we'll call each other, and these are people I've never met in real life, but I've become very good friends with them. I have a tremendous amount of respect, and some of the listeners, oh my gosh, we're on the same page on a level that's almost like we're cosmic brothers. We're putting two things together, and this guy's off researching the exact other side of what I don't have time to study, and I'm going after my side, and by the time we bring it together, it's a beautiful unit, right? And others were just on the same page with a couple little weeble wobbles where we're trying to follow people in the real world, and we don't know if they're shills or not. We don't know if they've been planted or if they're just crazy, But again, we try to take what's good from those individuals and leave behind what we don't believe. It's just a process, right? So I know I meandered around. I try to give you examples of things that I deal with so that you can say, I could almost guarantee if 20 people watch this video, which is usually my count, there's at least 2 of you who've had almost every conversation I've given you in this video in your own life. And you feel me. It's all based on rules that we adopt throughout life. Just remember that we take on things without evaluating them all the time. What choice do we have when we're kids? But it's our duty to reevaluate what we perceive as truth. The rules that we put on ourselves may not need to exist in this day and age. Some of them have wisdom we never really figure out. One of the there's a lot of sayings out there, I should say, that deal with trust. And trust is one of those amazingly ambiguously powerful concepts in life. If you love someone, and you're in your 40s and you've dated more than one person in your life, you'll have run into the situation where someone betrays your trust. And there's all kinds of levels of that, right? It could be a very small thing, could be a huge thing. I've definitely had people that I've dated who've cheated on me with other people. And it's a very interesting thing that occurs with that because I think that if you follow Hollywood's take on that whole thing, that if there's any infidelity in a relationship, even before marriage, Hollywood says, kick him out the door immediately, right? I could never be with anybody who cheats on me. And there's a lot of truth to that. But as you get older, you're kind of like, well, all right, was it a one-off? Are you done? Are you good? We had that weird argument that kind of made us distant for 2 or 3 months. We didn't really talk that much for 2 or 3 months. So whatever, you dated some other person and you did what you did with them, big deal. Obviously, if you wanted to be with him and it was going to work out, you wouldn't be talking to me anymore anyway, right? You would have stayed with that other person. So in my life, I've actually written people blank checks for some of that stuff. And so I'm very proud that I did because it didn't make a big difference. And, again, I always say this thing where back in the 70s and 80s, there was something called dating. There wasn't this go steady thing like there is today. Today, it's almost like we took our childhood. I don't even know if it's indoctrination. I think it just sort of evolved through society. But in the 80s, it was this big thing of we're going steady, right? And that concept goes back further than the 80s, but that's where I experienced it. And I feel like when I watched my folks divorce and then they dated, right? It wasn't this big thing of constantly of committing forever with every person they ever dated or got to an intimate level with. But today, that's why we do it, right? You just like someone, and you've got to lock their whole life down. You have to sort of make them a slave to you, right? And it's really fun when you want to do that with another person. And the older you get, the more you can do it quicker, which I find is interesting. But when it comes to trust, what I've learned the hard way is that the old rules about trust being broken and it being nearly impossible to repair trust with someone, it's actually true. And I can't say that I completely understand why it can't be repaired in the mind, but even with my very understanding heart, let's just say, or I kind of understand that humans, I should say this. By the time I got in my mid-20s, I realized that humans are flawed and that no matter what, put in an absolute condition where we say, this is something you can never violate, this is something you can never do wrong. Because we're human, we will. And I'm not talking about infidelity. You should be able to keep your pants locked up, once you commit to someone. But they're going to let you down because they can't be perfect. And Hollywood teaches you to be this habitual victim, right? Again, it's what I always say. The victims always get the prize, right? You get special treatment for a little while if you can prove you've been a victim in life. And we're addicted to that now. It's fucking ridiculous, right? So we have to get to a point where there's a balance to the rules that we make and that they're not all absolute. But it's at the same time, we need to realize that there are certain coveted things that the human mind seemingly can't deal with. And I think that trust, once broken, at least in my personal experience, and maybe you guys are better at it than me, it's extremely difficult to repair trust. Extremely difficult. So I yield to the elders of my previous generations who have lamented this over time through poetry and books and movies and films and personal conversations I've had with people who picked up this over the years and have lived the insanity of trying to reestablish trust over time. And so there are nebulous sectors of rulemaking that are always going to be nebulous in my mind. With external people that we meet or those that we are related to, I think that it goes a bit like a normal relationship in real life, which is that if something's not working, you don't just bolt, right? You don't just run away, but you engage, and you keep your composure, and you try to explain the huge theoretical and philosophical and life benefits of renegotiating your mind, of finding truth, that you understand the difference between black and white stuff and speculative stuff. I'm perfectly convinced, because of the debriefing that I received and the science that I've studied, that we haven't been to the moon. I think there's a million reasons why, even if I didn't meet the two guys that worked at NASA who said that they were told we didn't go after working as prodigy children for more than 15 years there. But if someone I'm with doesn't want to believe that, it's not the end of the world, because whatever. It doesn't apply to my life. It's just a little one-off thing that I happen to think is one way, and maybe they think it's another way. But there'll be those black and white things. You know, you don't want your kitchen full of poison. You just don't want it there. And you don't want to be burying your loved ones early. Your children, your spouse, your best friends. So the closer the person is into your emotional circle of life, the more you're going to have to make those hard decisions. And I think that, as we all know, the more you're in love with someone, the more that it's difficult to somehow reverse this process and say, okay, well, I'm just going to cut the person off because I can't deal with this. I can't deal with the fact that my knowledge isn't respected. You know, I have found over the last several years that, and it's going to sound a little arrogant, but someone will compliment what I know. You're so smart. Well, you remember all this stuff. It doesn't mean I'm right, okay? But at the same time, that person in the next sentence will argue with me about the simplest fucking thing that I know, right? The most black and white, certified by other doctors, other neurologists, geniuses in the world. The things that I have the most evidence for they're actually black and white. This is bad, this is good. I hear that full rejection because they have committed to it in their own lives, or they just simply, their hubris can't let go of the fact that they made a bad decision, that they didn't really do any research. They just took things into their life and didn't realize it. They got duped, right? And you're the messenger. You're the messenger. And it gets again, if you want to surround yourself by people that are going to constantly argue with you about simple shit, right? That's where you sort of had the gauge in your life to say, wow, if they're arguing with me about this simple shit, then when it really comes down to something about life that's big, right? I want to give an example here in a second here. You may be in for a ride it's fatal to you, your insides. Now, I'll give you an extremist example, which I hope is an extremist example. There's a lot of indications that the economy is going to go through some really horrible shit in the next 24 months. Wall Street's been saying it. The Wall Street Journal's been lamenting about it. The Pope's talked about it now. Politicians are talking about it constantly. Economists, the independent economists that have these alternate media outlets, true, they do generate a lot of traffic by pimping fear. But there's a million ways on paper that the entire world economy can crash. And if you have any doubts, look up derivatives, the derivative bubble, and how it can affect the economy. But let's just say in the next 24 months, let's say it's going to happen in 24 months from the day you watch this video. It's probably going to be shorter than that, but if it's going to happen, the economy is going to crash. The United States economy is going to tank 50% on the stock market, which is going to scare away all of these investors because we have no manufacturing, we have no gross national product. And so in terms of Americans surviving off of anything, we're going to have 2/3 of the population unemployed. Extreme example, right? Now, that's just one example what could go wrong. That's not a natural catastrophe, either man-made or truly natural. That's not an act of war. But now take, under those circumstances, the people that you've surrounded yourself with and think about how they would be able to triage the nightmare of that reality. If they can't accept the fucking toothpaste is going to ruin their goddamn mind, what are they going to do when they wake up and everything that they own is worth nothing? They have $100,000 in the bank they can't get out of the bank, and even if they could, it's not worth more than a postage stamp. What's going to happen then? Do you really have a teammate for life that's going to be able to deal with this shit? Or are you going to be saddlebagged with inertia? How could this be happening? Their brain just locks up. It's like the computer burning up and overflowing. It's like when Robbie the Robot was told to kill the commander of the Unforbidden ship. He just couldn't do it. He had this directive not to do it, and he starts overflowing. Well, that could happen to someone that you know, that depending on how close they are in your circle and how much you're dependent on them within the circle, you might be dealing with a catastrophe of your own demise, because the steps that you need to take to protect yourself and your family, or just your own happiness, can't be had, right? You know, if I saw the economy tanking really mega hard, I might put everything in my car and drive to the Midwest, where I know I've got some land I can pitch a tent on with someone with enough money to help us all out. But what if I can't get out of town because the people I'm with won't leave town? And it's just the mob that's coming. You know, in the middle of the night, everyone's house gets robbed by these mobs that got together because there's one guy with the big stick, and it's all rule of the jungle, right? The military can't handle the whole country going crazy, which is one reason why I don't think it can happen at the level I'm talking about. But the chaos that might ensue might be an issue. I think it's funny that a lot of the soft-hearted individuals that can't deal with reality also can't deal with the consequences of their own bad choices. I'll give an example. A lot of people have not lost anyone in their life. And some people have lost people that couldn't be any closer. And once you lose someone in your life that's really, really close to you, it doesn't have to be a spouse or anything, but it could be your uncle, your best friend. I lost one of my best friends, and I wouldn't say it devastated me, but it's the very next level up from devastation, or down from devastation, right? It was horrible. And when I look at my own health in relation to what he had to experience, because none of us knew anything, we're ingesting toxins 24/7, be it whatever he did, I have to live for that person in a metaphorical way that I will not easily be duped into being sick. I don't like it when people die around me. I don't. But I've been through it. I know how to deal with it. I know exactly the Kubler-Ross emotions I'm going to go through, the anger, denial, acceptance stages I'm going to go through when someone passes. But some of these folks, they can't hear anything about reality. They can't handle the most minute loss in their life. But they are the ones playing with death like it's a fucking game. And so at some point, if we could take the fear that they've allowed to put them in this box of sort of a shitty life and go, look, you're in this because you're afraid of wolves. You're a fucking sheep in the middle of this pasture because these propaganda wolves have got you locked in this pasture. And say, look, the real wolf is inside the fucking pasture. They're not outside the pasture. It's inside the pasture. There's one of those sheep that are actually a bear dressed as a sheep, right? And he's going to eat your lunch. And it's called early death. It's called painful death. You know, and I find one thing that's interesting. I like to harp on death because it's where we're all headed if we don't get healthy, and we're all going to die, right? You can't escape that. But to the degree you open your mind and you live in the truth, you don't want to die early for Christ's sake. And you don't want to be in your body a dipshit, drooling, right? 20, you have a healthy body, would have lasted you another 20 years, but because you ingest the toxins in your mind because you were so fucking badass with your good decisions, you end up paying the price, And so I feel like if we could just let them know, look, you're doing the exact same, you're headed right at the thing that you don't want to have happen the most, which is losing complete control of yourself, getting that diagnosis from a doctor that might change your life forever. I think you get my point. This one went on a little long. I hope that the very principle of this got to you in about 5 to 10 minutes, which is that we make these rules to control our lives, to get rid of the chaos. The second tier is that we don't renegotiate those rules. And we need to. We need to, if you can, every day you wake up, the ones that you think that aren't quite working out. You can feel the ones that don't work out. You can feel them because you've made choices, you follow the rules, and it's not working somehow. And sometimes it's just us getting tired, and we're like, Jesus, I know what I need to do. I need to finish that book I'm writing. I need to, work harder at work, get ahead so I can not have this pressure on me on the weekends that I feel like I'm going to go to work on Monday and get fired sort of thing, right? It's tough mixing your internal regiment with your external people, because the more you get good at it, the more it becomes tough. Because like I said in the last episode of expanding your mind, there's all these steps that you've thought through that other people haven't thought through. And there's only so many velvet glove theories and techniques to sort of softly let the other side know what you believe. But at some point, if you get nothing but consistent resistance, and you don't think it's ever going to get into an intellectual conversation where you actually have the fucking right to debate something, right, without anger being involved. If someone looks at black and white facts and can't see it after the 10th time, and you've come at it from different angles, right, always expect someone to reject your first smoking gun conversation, always. I mean, it's going to take you maybe 2 or 3 at minimum, right? But you're going to have to constantly rebake the information from different angles to take symbols of authority that they actually respect and say, look, this person contradicts this. So you actually believe in people that also don't believe, right? I find it interesting that some people have relatives and friends that they respect deeply that can say something on a dime and they'll immediately believe it. I dated a person a few years ago that I would tell her something, and no matter what I said, it wasn't true. It was fucking weird, right? But then again, my intelligence was always an accolade that she would brag about to other people, but she wouldn't believe it. And then she would meet some old guy, some old business guy giving a lecture somewhere. She joined some cult for a little while. But these authoritative figures would get on stage and give a shitty version of what I said. Saying the exact same thing, but with less detail, less examples, less concrete evidence, instantaneously true. And then rush home to me to tell me how enlightened she was, right? Right. Cut your fucking losses, man. Go straight for the source. That's all I got to say. I'm just joking. But, you can live your life in a constant evaluation mode that's very friendly and very nice. And you're probably one of those people that are the educators, if you're listening to me. You are the person who is in my shoes. So I'm always trying to speak from an empathetic standpoint of you and I are the same. If you can muscle through, if you're actually watching this second of the video right now, you made it, 90 minutes into this video, we're the same person. I am preaching to the choir. And if you made it this far, then you definitely feel me, right? So, again, thanks for listening. These things are getting more and more views, which is kind of cool. It's still really at its infinitesimal viewing rate, but this one's a little bit, I'm always calling these one rated real, if I swear at all. They're really for you devout folks that have just been through the machine, man. You're just, again, like, there's no other way to say it, but you're tired of the bullshit. There's no other way to say it to the point where you really feel what I'm saying. So I'm going to let these hang out there every once in a while. Sure to offend folks that are still hanging on to their teddy bears at night. But for those of us who have had the courage and the, I guess that's just all I need to say. For those of you who've had the courage to actually muscle through this stuff, regardless if you believe everything I believe, I salute you, because I know that you are traveling that path that is, if it's not least traveled, you have the machete in front of you and you're the one cutting down the path for the very first time, right? So to all the Magellans out there, help people learn the rules that rule them. Please give me your feedback, because without you guys, I'm just meandering around subjects. I try to make these things as unique as possible. I do think that some things are worth repeating, but I've had some suggestions for shows. One of the suggestions I got from a close friend of mine is to do one on genetically modified food, because I need to talk about it for 1 hour to make it presentable in this format. I need to do the research on, exactly where the technology is today, how it's being applied, and the dangers and what have you. So that's one of the ideas that's come my way that I'm working on. So anyway, if you made it this far, thanks for listening. Learn the rules that rule you. Over and out.